We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Judy, welcome. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about your book, which is your memoir, right?
Yep.
And then we're going to finish it up with your healing journey. So I love it. So why don't you tell us about yourself and your book?
All right. Well, my name is Judy Foreman, and if you're looking for the book on my website or on Amazon or someplace, it's Foreman, Foreman. Otherwise, you won't find the book. The book is titled Let the More Loving One Be Me, and that's a line from a poem, actually, by W.H. Auden, although I had to look that up. But it tells, the title comes from a very sweet story when I was hiking in Switzerland with my husband, Ken, and we stopped on the trail, and I said to him, a line from a poem just popped into my head. And he said, "What is it?" And I said, the full quote is, "If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me." And he said, "That's lovely. It's like a marriage vow." And I said, "Yeah." And then I just looked at him and I had tears in my eyes, and I said, "Let the more loving one be me." And then he just gathered me in his arms and said, "Let the more loving one be me." So that's why I titled the book that.
That's awesome. What a great story.
Really a nice story. So my life in a nutshell is I am a journalist, and happily so. Journalism has been a fabulous career. It's fun, it's important, it's noble, it's exciting, meaningful. And
it was healing as well, especially writing your book, right?
Healing, yes.
Writing, there's a lot of healing in writing, I have found for myself too.
Yeah, writing this memoir is not exactly like journaling. Journaling I have used occasionally, and that's where you just pour it out, just raw, unprocessed, not even publishable stuff. Just totally yuck. Writing is really polished, and it's very different from journalism. In journalism, the goal is to tell the truth right up front in the first paragraph, be as clear as you possibly can, no mystery, no little breadcrumbs for people to follow, and no mystery, just total clarity, and just get the truth out there. Writing fiction, which I've also done in the last couple of years, and writing the memoir is totally different. It's much more, first of all, the memoir is about me. Writing in journalism is about everybody else, which is much safer.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Much easier to hide behind quotes and hide behind other people's doings, feelings. So writing a memoir, I didn't set out to write a memoir as a book. I took a class in memoir writing. I belong to a group at Harvard, the Harvard Institute for Learning and Retirement. It's one of those lifelong learning centers that a lot of universities have. And one of the courses that you could choose from was about memoir. And I decided, sure, I'll take that and see what it's like. And I wrote my first memoir, and then it was a weekly course. So I kept writing one memoir a week, and I took the course multiple times. And before I knew it, I had a huge stack of memoirs, some funny, some sad, but all sort of telling the story of my life. And it occurred to me that I could put it together as a memoir. And as a journalist, I fleshed out some of the memoirs with some journalistic reporting. Like, I'll get into that in a second, but my father was sexually abusive to me when I was a teenager. He would come into my room, the doorway of my room, every night, undressed except for a t-shirt. So everything was hanging out there. And it was terrifying. I would listen for his footsteps coming down the hall. I was frozen in dread. and he'd knock on the door and open the door, and I would pretend to be asleep, but he would persist and say, I think you're awake. And he never touched me, but it was kind of like psychological rape, or what people call a mock execution, where the terrorists grab you and pretend to shoot you and don't, but the terror gets seared into your brain.
It's
So
still, yeah,
I
very
grew
terrifying.
up terrified of him. And my mother certainly did not protect me. I mean, where did she think he was going, half dressed every night? I finally told her when she was dying, and she said, oh, you should have told me. But it was so normal that he did this. This was, it sort of didn't register with me that this was practically a crime. It was, this is what happened in my house. Maybe other people had it too. How did I know? I didn't really crystallize it as something reportable.
Right. I mean,
Even
you're
if
a kid. How would you even, you're innocent. You don't think about those things. It's hard enough for us adults to try to process that, right? There's no way you as a
Absolutely.
child could do that.
That's completely right. And even if I had told my mother, I am 100% convinced she would have done nothing. She would have wanted to protect her marriage and, believe her husband. She wouldn't have confronted him, I'm sure.
Let me ask you this. Were there laws in place back then to protect children from this?
I have no idea, honestly.
I don't think so, honestly, because it was my understanding that a lot of the laws protecting children didn't really come into play or into place until the 1980s and 90s.
Yes. And if, when I think about it now, I think, well, if I had crystallized it in my mind as something to tell somebody about, who would I have told? I mean, we did have a church, a Presbyterian church, but the ministers were all old fuddy-duddies. I couldn't imagine telling anything to them.
Yeah, that would be kind of scary.
I wouldn't have thought of going to some official like a school counselor or something. I wouldn't have had anyone to even think of telling, or known what to tell. But if you don't mind, I have some statistics that have to do with this that I put at the end of the memoir, talking about my father coming in. Can I just read you this part?
Yes.
This part gets me every time. I have a friend whose brother sexually abused her every night. She warned, don't tell. For years, she didn't. When she finally did, her family fell apart. I have a friend who was raped by her live-in grandfather. She told no one for years. I have another friend whose stepfather, a former priest, shoved her headfirst into a snowbank when she was 6, nearly suffocating her. He then raped her when she was 11. I have a friend who was first raped by her father, an MD and a university professor, when she was 3. Her sister committed suicide. The point is, these are women I happen to know well. I did not seek them out to make a point. Only over time did I learn their stories. In other words, this kind of abuse is very, very common. According to the CDC, an American is sexually assaulted every 73 seconds. And 1 in 5 American women experiences completed or attempted rape in her lifetime. The really scary thing to me is that other data show that 1 in 3 female rape victims experienced rape for the first time between 11 and 17 years of age. Worse than that, 90% of child sexual abuse victims know their attackers. And in fact, 78% of the perpetrators were the parents of the victims. And that figure comes from the US Department of Justice.
Oh, that's
This
frightening.
is common, and this is happening to children as well as adult women. And it has taken me years of therapy to understand what happened and to tell the truth. And the truth has kind of the uniting theme of my memoir: truth as a journalist and truth figuring out what was going on in my family. Awful as my father was and comes across as I talk about it, my mother's neglect and failure to protect were perhaps more damaging in the long run.
I agree. I had something very similar. My father did not protect me. Actually, he ran and hid, literally. He literally went and hid when my brother would go off. Yeah. So yeah.
You mean your brother was the abuser?
My brother and my all three of them actually, but my brother was the one that was the real loose cannon in the family. He's the one that did in my younger, well, all the way up until I was 18. He's the one, it wasn't sexual. But he was the primary abuser. But I had a mother who also used that abuse to help manipulate and control me. And then I had a father, you know, when my brother was in 8th grade, was bigger than my dad. And I literally witnessed the power change. And so when my brother would go off on his tangent, he would literally go hide. I remember going looking for him one time and he was in the bedroom hiding in the corner. And it was his little boy that was triggered, right? That's what it was.
Right. We all get that. Yes, absolutely.
But it's frightening. And you're right. That's devastating when you know that your mom did have the ability to protect you and yet didn't.
Right. And also, I don't know if this was true for your father, but my mother was very superficial, great hostess, good cook, pretty, did her wifely thing, but emotionally not there. And that lack of an attachment, it's called an insecure attachment, that's very damaging to kids. There's nobody home.
Yeah, you need that emotional connection.
Yep.
And with your parents, first of all, that's your very first caregivers. That's who you should be connecting with.
That's your world. That's your only reality.
Yeah, exactly.
So I eventually, got through high school, did fine, got into a good, I went to Wellesley College, which is an all women's college. And that was brilliant. I went for the wrong reasons. I went to marry a Harvard guy. I ended up marrying 2 Harvard guys. But it was wonderful to be valued as a woman, both because of and in spite of being a woman. That was not the case in my family. Women were not valued. And it was eye-opening to think I could have a career, or my brain was worth something. My thoughts were worth something. What I said was worth something. What I wrote was worth something. I mean, that was a huge, wonderful thing.
Empowering and built your confidence, didn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And after college, I met my first husband at the first mixer of freshman year, and we went together all 4 years of college and went off in the Peace Corps, which was great. We went to Brazil, and that was great to be far away from home and part of our own lives. In fact, I had my child there, my baby, in Brazil. He's now 54, so
still your baby.
But it was great. And then I was going to get a degree in psychology, but I discovered journalism. A friend of my then husband's was a journalist, and he helped me get a job at a small paper in Massachusetts called the Lowell Sun. And I basically never looked back. It was made for me and me for it. It was a great match between temperament and job. I'm very extroverted, and I talk to people all over from all walks of life, and I love it. And you also get information that way when you're interviewing people. So that was great. And I love to write. So that was terrific. And psychologically, what was really important was I was actually being paid to find out the truth in situations. What was really going on in the city council? Who was really manipulating things? And that was so different from what I grew up in, that I've become a very strong free speech advocate, because without freedom of the press, we are in deep trouble. So it's been very educational. To heal from the family stuff. I didn't really start doing that until I began therapy, which was around the time that I got divorced from my first husband.
Okay.
And I went to several different kinds of therapists over the years, and all were helpful in a way. The one type of therapy that I still do, and I have found the absolute most helpful, is called internal family systems. I don't know. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's gaining in numbers and popularity and whatever. It's very helpful. You learn to like you were saying with your father hiding in the closet, that triggered the child part of him, child in him. And we all still have little children stuck inside us who
Yes.
never got to say their piece. And we
Right.
all have, anger parts that try to protect us from those little parts and anxiety parts so you learn to sort of separate those things out and have a compassionate conversation almost with those little people, and with your defenses. And I've found it extremely effective.
Yes, I've used that in my life as well. And it's very powerful.
Yeah.
It was for me. It was actually a game changer for me.
What was the type that you used?
I don't know if there's a name for it. But I actually was doing this. I discovered it while I was doing an EMDR therapy. And it was really what it was for me at the time was little Lisa didn't have a voice.
Right.
Because when she did, she got hurt. And so she was facing one of her abusers and was trying to talk to them and was frightened. And what I did is the big Lisa came alongside her. And as soon as my therapist said, why don't you come alongside her? Like that hit, like that resonated. And it was then that everything opened up, that little Lisa felt brave enough and safe to finally have her say, and it was very respectful. But big Lisa also, little Lisa spoke as the little girl. Big Lisa spoke as the adult.
Right. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
But I found you have to do it over and over again. It's not a one-shot deal.
Yeah, it took a few times. It didn't take a lot because there was something very empowering for me the first time I did it. And every time I did it after that, it was more empowering.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad for your podcast, and I'm glad for people who are listening, because there really is hope. I mean, we shouldn't have to spend our lives undoing this damage, but
we learned to manage it. I mean, yes, I believe that you get a measure of healing that takes you to a point of you're able to manage it. It's not managing you anymore, right? You're empowered, you're in control. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to still have some setbacks. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have triggers, but the empowering part is you understand it and you learn how to manage it.
Right.
So for you, what do you think the key thing for you in your healing?
Sort of recognizing that my anxiety, of which I still have some, not nearly as much, is trying to protect me from the powerless feelings that I had as a child. It's really a protector trying to make me not feel those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then when I do, is exactly as you said, I almost talk to the little one, get the little one to come sit on my lap or hold my hand or whatever, metaphorically. You become, it's reparenting in a way.
True.
Which is sort of too common a term, but yeah, it's amazingly powerful. And for me, it has taken a long time, but it's been worth every second. And what I was going to say is, as I've done all this therapy, after my divorce, it was sort of a 10-year drought where I was all by myself. Then I married a man named Tom, and he was great. But and then he died of prostate cancer a few years ago. And now I'm with my third husband. And as I have gotten better internally, emotionally, and more mature and more able to be intimate, I've picked more men that are better and better and more able.
Me too.
Interesting.
Me too. Yeah. My first husband's very different than my current husband. Very different.
And I am different. And that's because,
me too.
And I think that's a very hopeful message for people listening, that, know, because you may get divorced as a step toward growth. If you're getting out of a unsatisfactory or even dangerous situation, that there are better partners out there.
Right.
Not tons of them, but
yeah, there's not a ton of them willing to do the work, especially as we get older, right? I mean, your pool and it's important too that we do our own work, because we
Oh,
can't put, right. We can't put our, happiness on someone else and expect that they're going to
right.
make us happy. We've got to go into this happier. And that is definitely what I did in this relationship, the marriage I'm in now, is I was a lot healthier. He had done a lot of work on himself over the
Oh,
years
that's
too.
huge. That's huge. Both
Yeah.
people have.
Because we
Yeah,
really are iron sharpens iron. We really are. We really do. Like, he's really helped me in my healing. I've helped him in his. He's
that's
been my
great.
first real safe place outside of
Yes,
me.
yes, that's great.
You know, yeah.
Well, and the person who sort of invented or came up with this internal family systems therapy is a psychologist named Richard Schwartz. And his book on couples counseling, the title of it is "You Are the One You've Been Looking For." You know,
Mm,
yourself are responsible for just what you said, your own mental health and happiness. I mean, the
mhm.
other person can be your best friend and help, but they've got their own stuff.
Right,
You know, you are the one you've been looking for,
right,
which
right.
is a good message because you tend to expect too much from the other person or put everything onto the other person.
Yes. And for those people who like to control things,
Yes.
I'm a former control freak. But you can control this. You
Yeah,
can't control them. So
right,
that's
exactly.
right. So that's freeing. So I can work on this. I can make changes here, which then goes out. Right.
Right. That's
So
exactly right.
that's empowering.
Boy, do you get it. So do I.
It took me a lot of years, but yeah, I'm finally getting
Oh,
it.
I completely agree. I
And
completely
it's so
agree.
freeing.
Yes, it is. It is.
So let me ask you, how did your relationship end up with your father? So did he ever admit? Did he apologize? Have you forgiven him? What happened?
My father never let my brother or me call him dad. He made us call him by his first name. So he was really not a father. I mean,
What
he was.
was that? Why
God
do
only
you?
knows. He was a
Hmm.
corporate, I can't think of a clean word for a podcast. He was vice president of one of America's biggest companies. He was a
Oh,
corporate, tycoon.
got it.
So he also went bankrupt. He screwed up a bunch of times. But everything was larger than life. He's a very angry guy, alcoholic. Um, at the encouragement of one of my earlier therapists, I did say to him, we met in a hotel room when they were up here in Boston meeting with me and my parents. And I asked for some time alone with him, and he sat there in his, perfect suit. And I said, I was afraid you were going to rape me. I grew up in terror. He took notes on a little tiny business card. That was the only response.
He didn't say anything?
Nope,
Hmm.
nope,
That had to
nothing.
be hard.
Yeah, it didn't give me the release I was hoping for.
No.
Um, so he could never admit it, never take it in. Yeah, it was sort of a pointless exercise. I mean, it
Hmm.
didn't give me anything. And then when he was finally dying, I did go to see him in the hospital right before he died. And I thought to myself, should I say I love him or not? And I said, I love you, even though I really didn't.
Hmm.
And I did say, I thought to protect myself going forward, I have to say the truth. And I said, even though we've had some very hard times, and he
Hmm.
was unconscious, so who knows what he heard. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I was trying to tell the truth for myself, and I was glad I did that.
Well, that's really important
Yeah,
because, yeah, and you're checking your heart, and your heart is, I got to protect myself, and I don't want to be mean, but I've got to speak the truth.
right, exactly. So yeah, he was not a father. He wouldn't let us call him dad.
Yeah, he
um
was not emotionally connected
no,
at all. It was a
not at
business
all.
transaction.
That's right. And he used to have these family meetings. We were supposed to like be a democracy, but he was the only one who could speak. The rest of us, I mean, if we said anything, we got, like you said, if little Lisa spoke up, she got punished or
Hmm.
hit.
Hmm.
We didn't get hit, but we, got shot down strongly.
Hmm.
And yeah, he was in this corporate model of that's how you behave with people, and it's not true. Um,
Yeah. He just didn't know how to be a family man. He didn't know how to be a
Right.
husband or a father. He was
That's right.
100% corporate. And, you know,
Exactly.
if he's that, then there's no vulnerability, there's no
Right.
intimacy,
Right.
there's no
Exactly.
connection. It's a really safe place to be.
Yeah. Except you seem miserable all the time.
Exactly. He's stuck in
But
those four walls with himself.
his problem.
Right. Exactly. He
But
created it.
actually he made it everybody else's problem. Everybody tiptoed around him.
Yeah,
He
because
would
of
be
the
like a
anger.
bull in a china shop, you know, just crazy.
It wouldn't surprise me if he was abused, right? As a
Well,
child.
I know, me either, but I
I know
have
my
no
father was. Both my parents were.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would be my theoretical guess. I have no information about that, but I would think that maybe that would be it, and probably
Mm-hmm.
sexually, because
Mm-hmm.
everything he did was so sexual. We lived after college. They bought a house in Connecticut near a pond, and he used to make all the women guests take off their clothes and go skinny dipping with him, and they didn't want to do that. And when my brother brought his fiance home for the first time, he dropped his pants. I mean, there's something really
Yeah,
off.
there's something that wasn't okay there. And
Right.
again, was there help for people like that in situations like that?
He would not have known he needed help.
Right. It was his norm.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Ha-
And I think there are I mean, the sort of the wider message, hopefully, of my book is, this kind of and tragedies, and not just abuse, but alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
or death in the family while someone's a child, or
Mm-hmm.
suicide in the family. There's a lot of things that affect kids
A lot of
who
different types of trauma. Mm-hmm.
exactly a lot of different types of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't know that you can deal with it, at least to some extent. And the mental health system in our country is a mess. It's just
So
uh,
broken.
it's not on a par with physical health in terms of reimbursement
No.
funding. And there's
Just the
also
resources out there. We need more resources out there. Affordable resources.
qualified resources, not self-declared resources.
Right.
There's a lot of sort of people who call themselves therapists who really aren't.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of unhelpful pathways that people may turn to, especially if they're free or cheap or whatever. But yeah, that's hard. One thing I should mention, because I did for many years go to adult children of alcoholics, because my father was an
Mm.
alcoholic. That is a wonderful resource for people, and that's free. And their meetings, you can go online and find a meeting almost every
Nice.
day, anywhere, and that has the advantage of being free and available, which is great.
And one of the benefits to a support system like that too is when we try to do this alone, because I've done so much of it on my own, you feel like you're the only one that's dealing with these feelings, emotions, and thoughts, right?
Right.
And to go to a support group like that and to hear someone else repeat something that's been in your head that you're like, oh my
Right.
gosh, someone else feels like that. Someone else
Right.
thinks like that.
Yeah.
Someone else has that question, and there's a connection. And
And you say, okay, oh, I'm not crazy.
right, exactly. It's just this validation of, okay, I'm not the only one that feels like this. I'm not the only one that experienced this and has to
Right.
deal with this. And when I was doing the workshop, I was doing a childhood abuse healing workshop for 8 years. I was a co-facilitator in it. And the first night we would do story time kind of, and we would have everyone just tell one quick story. And for so many of them, they had never shared their story.
Yeah.
There's so much shame. Unfortunately, that is the theme of
Yeah.
emotion, in abuse. But
It
what it
is.
would do is it would connect them. And I would watch them, because we would sit in the front, we would watch them, and we would write down the lies that they were saying about themselves, and exposing them. But also it created a connection among the women, because like I said, some of them had never shared their story. So you could imagine the stuff that's going on in their head. All of a sudden they hear someone in the room expressing a feeling or an emotion or a thought that they had, and there's that connection. And
Yeah.
by the end of that night, these women started exchanging phone numbers. There was
That's
such a
great.
connection. It's amazing. So that's why you're right. Some group therapy like that, where you can connect with others, and it just really helps in the healing process for sure.
Yeah. So are you a psychologist? You said you were a facilitator.
No, no, no. It was through a church I was affiliated with at the time.
I see.
So it was religious based. It was amazing though. And we got to help a lot of women begin their healing process. And we got to witness a lot of really cool stuff. And we got to hear a lot of horrific stories. And so I will say there is absolutely hope at the end of the tunnel, because I know for me, I know when I did the workshop, I know in doing these podcasts, I'm hearing all these wonderful stories that there is healing. Yes, you're going to have to deal with stuff, but it's not as intense. It's not as
Right.
much. And you're so much stronger and able to do it. And it doesn't have the effect on you that it did when you were just dealing with it.
Right. Right. I'm wondering whatever happened with your father, the little child cowering in the closet. I'm
Oh,
not interviewing you, but I'm curious.
he never was healed. He never, he was always afraid. He died afraid. He did. And my dad and I were very close, and I love him dearly, and I miss him. He's been gone for over 20 years. I miss him every day. And now I have a better understanding of him, but he was abused definitely by his father. He left home at 14, because I think his dad called him like the devil spawn or something. His dad called him a name. And I remember my dad saying that was it. And at 14, he left home and he lived on the streets. He called himself a hobo. He was a hobo for years. I don't know how long. And he never reconciled with his dad. Now, when he talks about his mom, he absolutely adored her. And so
But she was abusive.
yeah, she didn't protect him, right? She didn't protect him. But he adored her, but he did self-medicate. He was not like a full-on alcoholic, but he had a buzz going quite often, just enough, like, a couple beers. And he died afraid. And I confronted him about my abuse because of that. I remember that I confronted him. It was probably about 4 or 5 years before he passed. He would not respond. He got so upset, and so like his anxiety was rising up so high. I had to stop the conversation because I was afraid he was going to have a heart attack. He would never admit, he would never, it was like, he was absolutely overwhelmed. And so we never, he and I never resolved it. I have since resolved it. I have understanding that my parents came from that abusive background. I have empathy because I just discovered my mom's story in the last year and a half, 2 years. And it's really sad. And it absolutely gives me empathy. There's still that little check in my heart of, you knew you were abusing, so why did you do that?
Right.
I feel that way with my mom. With my dad, it was so obvious that was that little boy being triggered, that you can't have a conversation with that.
Yeah, right.
I couldn't have a conversation. I was talking to a 6-year-old frightened little boy.
Right. Right. A therapist could, but you as the dog can't.
No, exactly. And he never dealt with it. He did. And it's funny because he had a lot of depression. He actually went in and had shock therapy at one point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he did. So he went to therapy, but I don't know. Obviously, they must have never dealt with the childhood abuse.
Right.
They must have never, because he never got healthy, and he took medication. And that is something, I watched that as a child, and I watched that as a young adult. And I always thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take medication. I mean, I feel like that about any kind of medication I take. That's just me. I watched my brother also do drugs, and so that frightened me. But I didn't want to numb myself with medication like my dad did.
I would just like to say, in defense of medication, for people who are listening.
Yeah, yes, you're right. You're right. Say it.
Some antidepressants really do help people. Some anti-anxiety drugs really do help people. And it's better to get the prescription stuff from a real doctor than self-medicating. And I think some people are so scared of addiction, they won't take any drugs, but the drugs can be life-saving for people.
You are right. And I'm glad you corrected me on that, because you're right. And I am in no way saying that, oh, I'm against medication, I'm against drugs. That is not, you're right. You could see that as I'm explaining this is clearly a fear that I have because of what I witnessed.
Right.
And
right.
that is what I didn't want.
Right.
There was a time actually when I went through my divorce that I actually did have to take some medicine because I absolutely was clinically depressed. And I actually had to take some medication for a while, and it was fine. I was resistant because I was afraid of it, but it did actually get me settled down and balanced so that I could function, because I was to a point where I wasn't really functioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for clarifying that though. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Glad we straightened that out.
Yeah. That was perfect.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you have forgiven your father? That's a tough question.
Second, no. I don't want to. I think personally, I feel that forgiveness is very tricky, and it
is.
sort of depends on how you define it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of pressure on people to say and perhaps even feel that they've forgiven an abuser. I feel like I've healed from the abuse, and I don't think about him at all. So he's not a psychological presence in my life. But no, I think you can't do violence to your own experience or your own emotions. Like I often think of South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation committees that they had there when they were trying to get rid of apartheid. And you can't have reconciliation without truth. If my father had listened to me and owned what he did, I could certainly have forgiven him. Maybe. I wouldn't want to say certainly. If he really got it, the damage that he did, I could have felt much more empathy. He never got it. So, I mean, forgiveness was not even on my agenda. I don't think about him. I mean, it's not an open sore, an open wound anymore. But to have reconciliation, you need truth. And
and reconciliation and forgiveness are different though, right?
That's true.
And what I will say about this is you can forgive someone and absolutely not reconcile with them, because that's actually what I've done with my brother. Is I have forgiven him, like just like you, like I don't feel anything, like I love him, I wish him the best. He's not welcome in my life because he's still an abuser. So we will not reconcile. He's not welcome to be part of my life and bring in the chaos and the abuse. He's not welcome. But I don't have, just like you, I don't have any hard feelings towards him. I can tell the stories and it doesn't have this effect on me anymore.
Yeah,
like
I'm not in tears,
Yeah, no. It's like you're telling someone else's story almost. It just doesn't have that catch on you anymore.
It's sort of a done thing.
But yeah, and I want people to understand too that, and this was actually freeing for me, because at the time that this was back when I went through the workshop myself, and I felt like a terrible Christian because I didn't want to reconcile with my brother. I didn't want that. And I remember in that workshop, and this was so helpful to me, is the person says, it was the facilitator, and she said, you should forgive the abuser and work through the forgiveness for you. It doesn't diminish what they do. But if they are still abusing you, you absolutely do not need to reconcile. And that was so freeing for me, because I was feeling guilty, because at that point I had cut him out of my life because he actually went after my son. And so I stopped it right there and I said, nope, we're done. And so I felt guilty because I thought, oh, I'm not being a very good person because I'm not having my brother in my life. And that was freeing for me. And I've never looked back.
Where does that, I'm not a good person because I won't let my brother back in my life. where does that message come from?
Well, that came from, I will tell you exactly where that came from for me, is my dad's belief system, because a few conversations we had about this, is he absolutely thought that my brother and I should be treated equal and that we should get along, and like he completely dismissed the abuse and wanted us to get along because it made it easier for him.
Right.
And so I needed to be nice. And have him back in our life.
Right.
So it doesn't make my dad uncomfortable.
Right. So that's external pressure.
Correct. But I didn't give into it, because when he pulled what he pulled on my brother, or on my son, there was no way that was ever happening again. And I even told, because at the time my dad lived with us, my family, and I told him, I said, my brother is not welcome over here when we're not here. And I said, and if I find out that he is coming over here when we're not here, you're going to be asked to leave. Because I cannot have my son not protected. And I did say to him, you didn't protect me, but I'm protecting him. That was the only time I said anything like that to him. I was adamant.
You're giving me goosebumps. I mean,
it's just, it's funny because it's that righteousness that rises up in me that wasn't there for me.
Right. I know.
Right.
It's easier for somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. So it was empowering. And to this day, I mean, I haven't seen my brother in well over 20 years, and I wish him the best. And I just recently reconciled with my side of the family. And one of the reasons why I kept my distance, I realized, is because I thought my brother was still involved with the family. And but I recently found out that's not true. So now I can reconcile with my family again.
Good.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This has been great.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
And tell us about your book and how people can contact you, how they can find it. And we're going to have all this information as well down below.
Yeah, I probably have the links. Well, the book is called Let the More Loving One Be Me. And my name is Judy, Judy Foreman, Foreman. And Judy Foreman is the name of my website where you can buy the book. And you can also go on Amazon or any of the other book selling websites and buy it. And enjoy it and talk to other people about it. And if you feel like it, write something on Amazon for it.
Right.
Because I think there's some universal messages in my particular story.
And there's such a message of hope. That's what's so important, that we're leaving with a message of hope.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much.
And thank you very much.
It's been great.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.